The attacks on James Gunn and the DCU just continue by the Snyder cult, and I just don't get it. I don't understand, and why there has to be a Zack Snyder is better than James Gunn debate makes no sense to me at all, especially when James Gunn isn't the reason that Zack Snyder is no longer doing DC. It all just baffles me. Now you have this grifter, this loser of a person trying to build this debate on YouTube, Aaron Fisher. Look, let's just first play this because this is really ridiculous.
Popular this podcast was. So this is some crazy stuff. 8 months ago, James Gunn was on Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum.
First off, Michael Rosenbaum's podcast is pretty cool. I've enjoyed it for a number of years. I remember when it came out. I want to say it was probably back in 2017, 2018, somewhere around there that podcast came out. It's been an excellent podcast. His podcast, when he interviews people, is much different than Joe Rogan's podcast. It's more down to earth. He talks about and gets kind of inside everybody's head, and it kind of talks about things that Joe Rogan doesn't talk about. It's a very different podcast, so keep that in mind.
I actually watched that whole interview. It's very insightful.
It is very insightful.
You should go check it out.
Look at that. So he promotes it. Go check it out. It's very insightful. And it is very insightful because James Gunn talks a lot about how the genre of comic book movies has changed and how he understands that and how they can't stay the course that it has been going for the last number of years. Very insightful.
Gunn's a very interesting individual. I don't think he's going to do anywhere near what he says he's going to do.
And there's no claims to why he would think that. I don't think it's going to happen. Why? Explain, but he doesn't.
But you could see that after 8 months, it has 624,000 views. If you look at the Joe Rogan Experience in one day, 259,000 views. Are you going to sit here and...
Well, first off, he doesn't know how to, read his own, what he's saying there. 759,000 views. So you have Michael Rosenbaum's podcast, okay, which is a much smaller podcast than Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's podcast is the biggest podcast in the world. Of course he's going to have more views and more followers and more listeners than Michael Rosenbaum's. It's a very different podcast as well. That's number one. And number two, yes, we understand that the marketing, the promotion is going to be different for these podcasts. So that's number one, okay? I get that. But let's take a look at something here. Let's before we move on to what I want to talk about, let's see something here because look, this Aaron Fisher guy, he's a grifter, he's a clown, he is a piece of trash who has very little knowledge about what he talks about. How he even has followers and listeners is beyond me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But recently Joe Rogan had Kevin James on his show. And you want to know how many viewers he's had? 1,270,000. And just right there. Look right there. 1.2 million views. Riley Gaines, a swimmer, 1 million views. Zack Snyder still hasn't hit 1 million. If you want to get a good gauge of the popularity of Zack Snyder, that's what you want to look at, okay? You want to look at Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, here's the thing. The views that are going to be shown on here, yes, he's probably going to get close to 1 million views. Again, Joe Rogan has a popular podcast. It is a popular show. People listen to it. People that don't know Zack Snyder, that don't understand who Zack Snyder is or care about Zack Snyder, listen to his show on a daily basis. He is sort of the modern day, in a sense, Howard Stern. Years ago, people would listen to Howard Stern just to listen to him. They didn't care what guests were on there, who he was going to be talking about, or what he was going to be talking about. They just listened to Howard Stern because they wanted a good show to listen to. They do the same thing with Joe Rogan. There are multiple times where I just turn on Joe Rogan's podcast in my car because it's like, you know what, my other podcasts, I'm just not feeling them. I just want to listen to some good conversation. I don't care who he's talking to because I know it's going to be a good conversation. That's what happens with Joe Rogan's podcast. Michael Rosenbaum isn't that big. Michael Rosenbaum isn't that type of podcast where hundreds of millions of people are going to be listening to Joe Rogan's or to Michael Rosenbaum's podcast. So there's a big difference there. But that isn't what I really want to talk about here, because yes, while you want to sit there and make this debate and say, oh, this one, look at all the views that he's getting over here compared to what James Gunn is getting. First off, okay, we'll talk about that. Who cares? Let's just get past that. Who cares on that? Because why is everything a competition? Why can't things just be? Why can't it just be, look, Zack Snyder got 900 million views over on Joe Rogan's podcast, and James Gunn got 700 million views, or 600 million views, or 800 million views, whatever it is. Like, why can't it just be? Like, good for James Gunn. Good for Zack Snyder. I watched the Zack Snyder one. It was an okay conversation. I watched the James Gunn one. It was a good conversation. What people seem to forget, especially the ones that are trying to push this narrative that there is this, James Gunn versus Zack Snyder debate that isn't really there, is James and Zack are actually friends. They're friends. They've worked together in the past. Granted, it was about 20 years ago, but they still worked together in the past, and they've had conversations since. So why do you have to push this narrative that it's him versus him? It's not there. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. You are the one that looks like a fool. Also, James didn't fire Zack Snyder. James didn't end the Snyderverse. The Snyderverse, which isn't really a thing. James didn't end the Snyderverse. That happened in 2017. So you sitting there ragging on James Gunn and saying it's James Gunn versus Zack Snyder versus James Gunn makes no sense. It just makes you look petty. Also, let's not forget that James Gunn has as much artistic integrity, or right to the artistic integrity, that Snyder fans fought for with the Snyder Cut. Don't forget about the artistic integrity that you all fought for. It's not just Zack Snyder who gets it. It's James Gunn, it's James Mangold, it's Steven Spielberg, it's George Lucas, it's J.J. Abrams, it's all the filmmakers, it's all the artists, it's all the directors. That's what you fought for, not just for Zack Snyder. Also, the DCU isn't a slap in the face to the Snyderverse. It's not. It was an inevitable happening due to the previous two regimes of handling of the brand. AT&T's handling and Warner Brothers, previous Warner Brothers before AT&T, their handling of DC was piss poor. The way they handled everything was terrible. The DCU had to happen because of that. It's unfortunate. What happened sucks. It's unfortunate. But it happened. And here we are today. Snyder has closed the door. He has closed the door on that DC, that chapter of his life. Sure, he would do the Dark Knight Returns. He said that. But that isn't going to happen. It's not. Not anytime soon, if at all. And the Snyderverse won't happen because it's just too costly when it comes to the DCU, because the DCU is headed in a different direction right now. And that isn't Gunn's fault. And that isn't Zack's fault. And that's the thing that people need to understand. I get it. We want to see a certain thing. We want to see our characters a certain way. Don't forget that you have those movies. You have Man of Steel. You have Batman vs. Superman. You have Zack Snyder's Justice League. But what about all the fans who didn't like that? They want to see something as well. They want to have their Superman, their Batman they want to see. Why do they not get that? Why are you acting like they don't get to see what they want to see? Why is it only what you want? Why? Like, to me, I just don't understand why everything is just all about you, the Snyderverse fans. It's getting out of hand. And this Aaron Fisher guy who literally, I've watched maybe 4 or 5 of his videos now because I didn't want to talk too much about him without actually, seeing what he was about. Because I didn't want to be that guy who just watched a video of his and then tried to talk like, oh, I know everything about him. No, I watched a few of his videos, and it's plainly obvious that he is very obsessed with Snyder, so much so that it's almost stalkerish, the way he talks and acts about the Snyderverse. It's kind of creepy. His obsession with ragging on James Gunn is kind of disturbing as well. Again, he's one of those he's one of those many who rags on James Gunn and hates on James Gunn, but doesn't really give a reason why. It seems like he's just mad at James Gunn because the Snyderverse isn't coming back, when James Gunn has nothing to do with that. So it's kind of bizarre. And then he sits there and tries to talk about DC like he knows what he's talking about, but a lot of what he says is just talking out of his ass or regurgitating what other scoopers and grifters are saying on the internet when they don't know what they're talking about. So it's kind of bizarre. It really is bizarre. Let me know your thoughts, though. I want to know what you think about all this. It's kind of crazy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure you hit that like button, hit subscribe. On my journey to 500 subscribers, people. I'm on my journey to 500. I would like to get there by March 20th. I don't know if I'm going to hit that. I'm only at 315 right now. It's 145 away from 500 in less than 15 days or so, or 10 days. That's probably not going to happen. But let me know what you think. Hit that like button, hit subscribe. With all that said, I'll catch you all later.